time for another bicycle live stream on Sunday, April the 25th, Anzac Day, the day in Australia that we honour those who fought for our freedom so long ago. So I've ridden 32 kilometres, a beautiful ride to Bolman, the first time in probably a couple of years since I've ridden up to Bolman Heights and then down around the edge of the water, and I'll be sharing some really amazing photographs of the beautiful ride this morning. So yeah, I've done about 32k, and it's what's the temperature? 16 degrees. So yesterday people enjoyed the story about the Currumbin Valley Ghost. So this morning I'm giving you some more stories of some of the crazy things that have happened in my life. And you know, I was intending to write a book about this, and I probably will at some stage, because there's enough to fill a book, I think. So let's just there's a half a dozen here that I thought I wrote down last night. I thought, oh yeah, here's a few to sort of keep you entertained. And by the way, if the audio's breaking up at all, just let me know and I'll wriggle the plug. So I'm going to start off with one that happened way back in the 80s, when most of my good stories come from. My life has been boring since then. And in this particular one, it was back in the days when there was a whole group of us used to be known as CBers. So we used to get on a CB radio and we'd talk to each other. It was like using a two-way radio, but you could talk over quite long distances, and it was great for an introvert like me, just fantastic, because I'm very confident with my voice, but wasn't confident in person. So that was really, really great way of being social in those days. And also because we used to sort of hang around at night, I felt more comfortable sort of under the protection of darkness. So anyway, one night a girl and I decided to go and find a quiet spot to park in the car and just get to know each other a bit better, and if you know what I mean. And in those days, back in the 80s, there was a lot of new estates being developed on the coast, and we drove down to one which ironically ended up being very close to where I now live. So it was in Currumbin Waters, this new estate, and so there were new streets being built and houses slowly being put in the area, and I thought, this would be a good quiet spot to just park the car at night and just relax. And I'm trying to think of adjectives that aren't too descriptive. And so anyway, drove to the end of this cul-de-sac, the end of this street. It was dark, there was no street lights, there were no houses. They'd built some of the streets there. I won't say the name of it. Well, it doesn't matter, I guess. It was a street that came off Ware Drive in Currumbin Waters, and it was a little cul-de-sac street because it's all fully populated now. Has been for decades with houses. Anyway, we pulled up and it was dark, and we hadn't been there long, but I'm sort of looking out, we're talking and we're getting comfortable, and I'm just got to negotiate this here. I think I'm right. Yes, I'm right. And I look out the windscreen, and I swear I can see something moving in the darkness, like in the little bit of light that's out there. And further up the street, I can see something moving, and it's like, what is that? And it was quite a big object, and it was getting closer and closer to us. And got to negotiate this one as well. Wait for it. Yeah, sorry for this. Here we go. Right. So this big object I can see sort of moving close along the road, closer to it, getting closer and closer. I'm like, what the hell is that? And then I notice there's two of them. There's two objects coming along the road towards us. I'm like, okay, this is a bit bizarre. And as they start to get really close, the big object at the rear switches on its lights and its police lights because it was a police car, and sort of does its thing and gets close and pulls up, and sort of, you know, the policemen jump out of the car. The object in front of it was another car with its lights off. So these were the objects were two cars. They were approaching us slowly along this road, lights off. And when the second car, the one behind, got close, it turned its lights on and its siren, or not siren, its flashing lights, and basically pulled over us, my car, which was stopped, and this other car. And I didn't know what the hell was going on. And then what had happened was, because in those days we used a CB radio, you could track a CB radio using the meter on them. And, you know, sometimes you'd be lucky and you'd be able to find where somebody was just by tracking the signal strength on the meter. So what had happened was a couple of mates of mine had, without me knowing, had actually tracked where I was going very discreetly, and they'd turned their lights off in their car and were following, had, you know, seen where I'd parked, and then were slowly sneaking up on my car. And at the same time that this happened, the police were in the area, and they saw a car driving along in this new estate with no lights on, and they thought, this looks very suspicious, because it was a new housing estate with houses being built. So they thought it looked really suspicious. So they decided they better follow it. So they turned their lights off and followed the other car with its lights off. And then when they got to the end of the cul-de-sac, they decided to pull over and pull us over, so to speak. And they were convinced that it was a drug deal going down. They were absolutely convinced. I had to open up my boot. They went through my car. They went through the other guy's car. I still remember they're going, have you had any drugs today? And all, you know, sort of all these questions. And then they're checking my arms for needle marks. I'm like, wow, you guys are good. So, and it was just, let's just say, by the time we'd convinced them there was nothing sus going on, and they realised it was just a couple of CBers, or a few CBers, they left, and the girl and I were just decided, well, that's dampened any enthusiasm we had for having an enjoyable evening, so we left as well. But talking about the police and leading into my next story, I used to ride a postie motorbike when I was from my early teens, before I had my license. And that was my first motorbike that I learnt to ride on. And I used to live across the road from the pine forest in Palm Beach, and it was like heaven to be able to go out early morning in summer, like 5 a.m. in the morning, on this postie bike and ride in the solitude through the pine forest. And the postie bike was fairly quiet, so it didn't just make much noise and that. Anyway, one morning early, I'm riding through the pine forest, enjoying the trees and the solitude. And I rode up to the water tank at the top of Simpsons Road, which is still there today. But in those days, it didn't have a fence around it like it does now. So you could actually, there was a track that went around it, and you could walk around it or ride a motorbike around it. So on this particular morning, it's a fairly big concrete water tank, and you can't see around the other side of it. So I start riding around it. I get maybe 2/3 of the way around, and sitting in the middle of the track is a police car with what looked like two policemen inside asleep. I've come up behind it on an unregistered, uninsured motorbike with no license, and I've gone, oh shit. And I couldn't turn around. The track was not very wide, single lane track. I didn't think I could easily turn around without making a disturbance. and there was barely any room to get round the side of the car. So I just very, very quietly rode past them, my heart going thump, 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 and hoping I wouldn't wake them. And then started riding down the hill, and then just picked up speed as quick as I can and raced home. And I never, I did never find out if I actually did wake them or, what happened, but put the wind up me, and I think I stopped riding through there for a while until the call of the wild got me back. Now, talking about call of the wild, here's here's a really, it's hard to believe this happened, but this is another true story. This happened in the 80s when I had my, I think I was in my Austin Healey Sprite. Yeah, pretty sure I was. I was parked down at night time, probably about 8 o'clock at night, down at Crumman Beach, parked in the car park down at Crumman Alley. It was a great spot to sit and talk on the CB radio, because the radio waves would bounce across the water and you could talk to people up the northern end of the coast easily. And I'm sitting there, and I'm the only car in the car park. In those days, that's what it was like there at night. You'd be the only one there. But then I noticed a light come on down the other end of the car park, and I realised I'm not the only one. There's another car down there. And what's happened is they've opened their door, and it was a sleeker, and they've opened their door, and they had a red light at the back, inside rear of the front doors, and this light comes on when you open the doors, and it lights up the cabin, and like mood lighting. They said they'd opened the door, and this red light had come on. And I'm sort of looking, and I'm trying to figure out what they're doing. And I sort of focused a bit more, and I looked and I went, I don't believe what I'm seeing here. There was, as best as I could tell, there was a girl naked on the passenger seat, and the guy was climbing on top, and they were going for it. And I've got on the CB, and I've gone, guys, you will not believe what I am watching. And I've told them, and they've gone, oh, we're coming down to have a look. And so, this couple must have known that I was sitting at the other end of the car park, or they just didn't care. I don't know. Anyway, so shortly after that, whilst that was still happening, a bus comes down around the bend, on high beam, lights up the car park with these two. It just lights them up, clear as day. And they've gone, and they've decided to close the door and stop. And I've got back on the CB, and I've gone, guys, show's over. Don't bother coming down. Show's over. And they're like, oh, okay. And short time later, I see the interior light go on, the white interior light on the roof, dome light. And I watch whilst I see the girl climb into the back seat, and the guy climb on top in the back. And I've gone, oh, you won't believe this, guys. It's happening again. And I can't remember now how long that lasted, but nobody did actually come down to see it. But that was one of those bizarre 80s moments where people didn't get hotel rooms or motel rooms, or anyway. So, a couple of other ones I'll share with you. I was coming home in the daytime in my father's combi van and combi camper van, and I was one street away from home, and I'm coming down the street, and it's the back of Palm Beach. It's quiet. It's in that would have been early 80s, I think. And as I come down Cairns Avenue, it was, I think, a guy literally jumps out from behind a tree on the side of the street, and he's in camouflage gear with a gun, and he jumps out and he stands in the middle of the road, legs spread eagle, gun pointing, both hands on the gun pointing at me, and just stands there as I'm driving down the road towards him. I've gone, holy shit balls, what the hell is this? So I stop, and he cocks the gun upwards, points it upwards beside his head, like how they do that, and And he comes around the driver's side window and he said, is there anyone in your van? Because the van had mirror tinted windows, so you couldn't actually see in the back. And he says, is there anyone in your van? I said, no. And I'm sort of panicking. I'm going, what the hell's going on here? And he said, can you show me? I said, okay. So I get out. I go around to the passenger. Let me just get through this traffic light here. Okay. I go around the passenger door, I slide it open, and he gets a gun and he points it in and does the whole routine that, you see on, I don't know, cop shows. Sort of looks in with the gun pointing in, checks there's nobody in there, pulls his head out, cocks the gun upwards again. He goes, okay, where do you live? I said, just round the corner. He said, okay, go home, close all your doors and windows, don't come out. I'm like, what the? And I drive home, and I was still living at home in those days with Mum and Dad there. I've gone, Mum, Dad, you're not going to believe what just happened. And I tell them, and so we thought, we'll have a look. So we're looking out the front windows, and we could see a number of these guys in tactical uniforms with guns walking up and down our street. I'm like, this is full on. Anyway, it turned out later, in those days, there was a Shell service station, I think corner of 5th Avenue and Gold Coast Highway in Palm Beach. It had been robbed by two guys a short while earlier, and they were armed. And the police weren't mucking around. These two guys had taken off down the back streets of Palm Beach, and so they'd called in the tactical response unit, and they were trying to find them. I never did hear the end result of whether they found these guys or not. But so that was that story. Talking about people on the run, living in the 90s in my last house in Currumbin Valley, driving home one day, and in those days I had a police scanner in my van, and I used to listen to the police chatter. And so I'm driving along, and about 4 police cars go past me, overtake me real quick, flying down Guineas Creek Road, and I've just gone, whoa, something going on here, Hang on, I've got another, just let me negotiate here. I think we're going to be right. Yep. And they go flying past, and then a police helicopter goes overhead, and I've gone, whoa, there's something going down here. So I get on the scanner, and there's a lot of communication going on the police frequency, but I couldn't figure out what it was all about. So I go home, and my next door neighbour, he's out, and he said the strangest things happened. He said I was out in the, we're on acreage, and it's bush behind us up the hill. He said, I'm out the back, he said, and a guy comes jogging out of the bush and comes running out of the bush and jogs through my property. And I said, what are you doing, mate? And he said, I'm just out for a jog. And I'm like, and this is Steve, my neighbour, telling me this. And he said, and then he took off, crossed the street, and through the neighbour's property on the other side of the street. It's like, okay, that's bizarre. So to cut a long story short, what had happened? This guy had gone up to the street behind Simpsons Road in the top of Eleanor, and he'd gone there. It was a custody battle. He'd gone there to get his little kid or something, and he'd actually grabbed the kid and gone into the bush behind the house with this kid. And so the woman gets the police, and they didn't muck around. They sent out, they came out in force, and they came out with a helicopter as well to try and track this guy down. So he dumps the kid on their property in the bush behind the house and takes off down through the bush, which I've got to give him credit. It's not easy to get through that bush. It's steep, and and he takes off, goes through my neighbour's yard, Steve's yard, across the street I was living in, through my neighbour on the other side, into the creek, swims across the creek, Currumbin Creek, gets onto Currumbin Creek Road, stops a car, gets the guy out of the car and takes the car, then drives it down into the main part of Currumbin, abandons that car, gets into another car and takes it. And at some point, I can't remember at what point they were able to get him, but he took 2 cars and tried to take a third. And I think it was when he tried to take the 3rd car that they actually were able to get him. And what was the funny end of that story is that the police helicopter, they're looking through the bush and they found 2 kids wagging school hiding in the bush. So they're looking for this escaped guy and they find kids wagging school. I thought that was hilarious. So a couple more funny stories to keep you entertained on Anzac Day. Going back to talking about the CBers, I'll give you 2 more stories. There was one night I was talking to a couple on my CB radio, and this is back mid-80s, because I was 84, 85 when I was still in real estate, and I had a Fairlane. So it's V8 Fairlane, lowered. It wasn't particularly fast. It could corner fairly well because I had it lowered. Anyway, I upset this couple that I'm talking to on the CB radio. And the guy basically says, right, mate, we're coming to get you. And I'm like, oh, shit. So I can't remember where I started off from, but I took off in the ferry and headed up Springbrook Road at night. Now, in those days, Springbrook Road was even more treacherous than it is today. It didn't have as many of the safety rails. It had some really bad corners. And I'm doing my best. This guy's catching up behind. I'm doing my best to outrun him. And I'm going around these corners, pushing the ferry as fast as I can. And I come around a corner and I lose it. I actually lose control and slide off the road. Now, Springbrook Road is, on one side is steep hill and the other side is steep cliff. So I slide off the road on the steep cliff side on a corner. But amazingly, I slide off on the only corner that had a gravel patch off to the side of it, quite a big gravel patch. And I hit the gravel, spun around with the car ending up pointing back the direction I'd come from, down the hill. And the guy pulls up, like puts his nose of his car up to the nose of mine, basically. And there's the headlights are shining through the dust that my car's stirred up. And he just gets on the CB and he says, mate, you're a lunatic. And then just reverses up and drives off. and I just, it took me a while to sort of compose myself, because I thought, God, I've nearly gone off the edge of the road. The next day, I went back to see where I'd spun off the road in daylight. And yeah, it was the only spot that I could have spun off the road and not gone off the edge. So somebody was definitely looking after me then. And finally, let's finish up, because this is getting pretty long, this live stream, but I hope you're getting entertained. Finally, let's finish up with the story of when, back in the very early 80s, when my mate and I decided to drive out into Tallabudger Valley to take photos of our cars, and we wanted a picturesque setting. And my mate was a bit of an amateur photographer, so he had a reasonable camera, and I still have those photos, and they came up good, and I still have them. So he found a spot where there's this old abandoned farmhouse just off the road in Tallabudger Valley. And ironically, I have written about this story before. Ironically, that farmhouse is still there today. You can go on, you can't really see it on Google because it's covered by a massive tree or trees, but it's still there, and it's part of somebody's property now. But in those days, it was sitting in the middle of nowhere, basically. So we decide we'll just park our cars in front of this farmhouse. That gives it a nice backdrop, a nice contrast. And we take some photos. And it didn't take long before a guy comes riding down the road, probably a guy in his 50s or 60s on a bicycle, and starts questioning us, what are you doing here? And he's very, very suspicious, very like, what are you doing here? This is private property, you shouldn't be here. And I'm like, oh, okay, sorry, mate. And then I said, we're saying, okay, well, we'll go then. And then he starts this ranting and raving about, you're casing the place for drugs, and Australia hasn't been the same since Fraser got in, and I'm like, I turned to my mate Andrew, I've just gone, okay, let's get out of here, And I said, mate, we're going, okay, because he was just, not making a lot of sense. So we left. So we started packing up to leave, and I reckon we weren't even a minute. We hadn't even been able to get in the cars. And a guy comes down the road in a cement mixer, pulls up and goes, what are you doing here? I've looked at Andrew and I've gone, what is it about this place that people don't want anyone near? And he's going, this is private property, you can't be here. I'm going, yes, we know that, we're going. And so we get in the car and leave. And years later, I think it was years later, I'm talking to the local postie, Ross, who had worked I think he worked Talabudja Valley for decades. I was telling Ross, and he's going, oh, you mean old man so-and-so? And I've gone, yeah. He's gone, oh, he said, yeah, he said, that was all their land. He said they owned, this huge amount of land. And apparently what happened was, and this is part of the story I always get mixed up, is that one of them went mad and shot the other, I think, if I've got that correctly. But I remember the last time I shared this story, I did get a comment from somebody. I didn't share this story on live stream. I shared it as a written post, and somebody commented that they didn't appreciate the old family history being brought up. I'm like, okay. So I haven't mentioned any names, I haven't mentioned the street, but the end result was that after all that property ended up being subdivided and into beautiful acreage lots, and that old abandoned farmhouse is still there today in the front yard of a rather impressive acreage property. So I hope this has made your Anzac Day a bit more interesting. Remember to live vegan and save lives. And if you've enjoyed these true stories, let me know and I'll share some more. Ahimsa.